You're welcome to another interesting edition of the Economy and Politics Show, where we bring you key conversations around socioeconomic activities as it affects the households. Today, we'll be looking at 2023 opportunities for unlocking growth at sub-national level. And my guest is Mr. Iniobong Usen, Head Policy and Research, BudgIT. Nice to have you on the show, Mr. Iniobong.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, Otto, and thanks for having me.
Before we begin the conversation, let's give you some key stories from last week. The International Monetary Fund, in its latest report, projected that Nigeria's economy will grow at 3.2% for the remainder of 2022 and 3% in 2023. At the 9th edition of the Higbeti Economic Summit, the Lagos State government launched its 30-year development plan from 2022 to 2052. It also announced the Lagos Sovereign Wealth Fund Bill, which will pass to State Assembly for passage. And also, at the event, it became a key subnational that received approval by the federal government for the construction of the Lekki-Epe Airport. The Federal Executive Council, at the end of its weekly meeting, approved the takeover of the 202 billion naira Enugu to Onitsha Expressway by telecommunications giant MTN. This is under its tax credit scheme initiative. Kaduna State also hosted its 7th edition of the CADVEST Summit, which is an investment summit hosted by the state, which discussed the theme Building a Resilient Economy. The chief host and governor, Malam Nasser Rufai, anchored the discussions on the pathway for Kaduna to remain a competitive subnational economy in Nigeria. Those were part of the very interesting stories from last week. If you're joining us, it's the Economy and Politics Show, and our conversation today is the Roadmap 2023, Unlocking Growth and Development at the Sub-National Level. And my guest is Mr. Iniobong Usen, the Head Policy and Research, BudgIT. For those of us that are conversant with developings in the country, last week, precisely Thursday, October 13, 2022, BudgIT released its 2022 State of States report, which looks at activities in the subnational in a broader scale. It's been a discussion point since last week, and that's why we have him today to give further insight into this report, even as we're approaching another cycle of elections. So, Mr. Iniobong, you know why you're on the show today. So first, tell us some very key findings from this 2022 Budget State of the State report, because for me, there were some very interesting insights. For example, we see here that 13 states from your report grew their internally generated revenue by over 50%, which is a room for a lot of improvement. And we also even see that the cumulative expenditure of 36 states increased by 27% from 5.23 trillion naira in 2020 to 6.64 trillion naira in 2021. What also caught my attention was the personnel costs for states that grew by 5.38% from 1.46 trillion naira in 2020 to 1.54 trillion naira in 2021. And it was also interesting to know that 9 states reduced their overhead costs. Those are some of the key catchy parts that, of course, we took insights from. But for you, what were the key findings from this report? I know that Rivers State was number 1 in terms of fiscal performance ranking.
Yeah, thanks again. But before I go into key highlights from the reports, maybe I just need to throw or give a little background on what we try to achieve with the State of States. So with the State of States, we try to assess the fiscal health, fiscal sustainability of the states. We do a comparative viability of the states, see how well, they are able to perform fiscally within a particular fiscal year. We also assess their debt sustainability, also try to see how they are prioritizing investments in human capital development, fiscal infrastructure, right, over operating expenses. And so that's what we try to do for the 36 states. And for this year, we sort of improved on our methodology after consultations with very reputable institutions like the World Bank, the Nigerian Governors Forum, and the Debt Management Office. And so from last year, we can't say that the methodology we use in assessing the states is a lot more robust. 5 indexes. The first, which sort of looks at the ability of states to meet their operating expenses with what they're able to generate internally. The second, we try to also see how states using their gross FAC, which is their statutory allocation, what they earn as value-added tax, their internally generated revenue, and what they get as aids and grants, how that can be used to meet their operating expenses and loan repayments. For the third index, A1, we try to look at how states are growing their IGR by what percentage year on year. And so that sort of tell us the sort of reforms that have gone on in the states in the previous year, and how that has translated to a commensurate growth in their IGR. On the debt sustainability, last year, it was just to see how states can theoretically pay off their debts with what they earn as revenue in a year. But we made it more robust this year, having 4 sub-indexes for the debt sustainability. So first, we try to see how states, we try to see the debt to GDP of the states, the debt to revenue of the states, the debt service to revenue of the states, and the personnel cost to revenue. So to see how, after you have paid salaries and all of that, what is left from what you're able to earn as revenue for your overheads, for your loan repayments, or your loan obligations, as the case may be, and for capital expenditure. And all of that put together is what we now arrive at with our ranking on the overall fiscal performance. So for this year, like you had mentioned earlier, there was considerable improvement in terms of the revenues for the cumulative states put together. So the cumulative revenues grew by about 9.19% from 4.69 trillion end last year to 5.12 trillion this year. And also for IGR, that's the internally generated revenue for the states. Cumulatively, it grew also by 33.66% from 1.2 trillion to 1.61 trillion. But however, if you compare that at a very low capacity, less than 1% of GDP. So that tells you that we are not properly taxing. If you look at the size of our economy on a macro level, we are not able to generate enough taxes from the economic activities that are going on. Also, 50% of the total revenue of the 33 states were from FAC, that's federal transfers. And 13 states, for 13 states, at least 70% of what they earned as revenue was federal transfers. So that sort of signals the over-reliance and over-dependence on federal transfers for the bulk of the states. It within the current fiscal challenges that Nigeria faces. In all the months of this year, the NNPC has not remitted a dime to the federation account. And this is money that would usually be shared to the 36 states of the federation. So it's important that the states, begin to carry out serious reforms to improve their domestic resource mobilization capacity, especially if you situate it within the fact that the country is going through serious fiscal crisis. In the first or in the 10 months of this year, all of the months of this year, the country has, or NNPC, as the case may be, has not remitted a dime to the federation account. And this is, this sort of transfers are often what goes from the NNPC to the federation account is often what is shared among the 36 states. For a state like Bayelsa, over 90% of their revenue was earned as gross FAC, which is a accumulation of statutory allocation, the 13% derivation, and their VAT. So for this state, they need to begin to see how they can wean themselves off the over-reliance and over-dependence on federal transfers. Then also on sub-national reforms, which was the theme for this year. I mean, owing to the SIFTA's World Bank program, which is the state's fiscal transparency, accountability, and sustainability program for results, which incentivizes states to carry out specific reforms, right? And from that particular program, a lot of reforms around transparency and accountability, right? And judicious use in the resources of the states have happened within that in the 4-year period. I mean, before 2018, it used to be very difficult for the average Nigerian, even for people in the media, to access budget documents. Budget documents used to be treated as classified documents, right? But owing to the SIFTAS program, a lot of the states, virtually all the states, are a lot more transparent, you know, from the publishing of the proposed budget to the publishing of the approved budgets to publishing of budget implementation reports, audit reports, and even more recently, the audited financial statements of the local governments, right? So for the bulk of the states, right, you can now go to their website and see the audited financial statements for the local governments in that state. And they have even gone a step further, I mean, better than the federal government, to even enact audit laws that grant operational and financial autonomy to the state auditor generals and the local government auditor generals. Now, whether that has been fully implemented is yet to be seen. Now, on personnel costs, right? The states have also, you know, a lot of the states, 35 of the states, actually have captured the biometric data and BVN data of all the persons in their civil servants, no, at least 70% of the civil servants and pensioners, right? And as a result of this, for the last assessment that was done in 2020, about 15,000 plus ghost workers were of at least 13 states. And this led to massive savings from the states in terms of personnel costs.
Definitely. Those are commendable highlights to show that this State of States report is bringing more accountability. And the SIFTAS, again, brings the public finance of states to the front burner, which is very important, not just focusing on federal now, but let's look at what states are doing. But quickly, Ms. Iniobong, we are entering a cycle, the election cycle, and what will be the key issues in 1 minute that the 2023 to 2027 class of governors will have to grapple with and navigate states through what would be a challenging phase?
Very critically, states need to begin to, improve their domestic resource mobilization capacity. We are not benefiting from the windfall from oil, right, which makes up about 95% of our foreign exchange earnings. So for things around the ease of doing business, for instance, right, states need to, sort of enhance the ease of doing business. I know for issues around security, power that are not under the exclusive preserve of the states, and they can do very little to sort of impact change in that particular area, except the constitution is amended to grant more
around power, ports and airports. So if those deliberations are agreed on, yes, agreed on, yes, if we have
these are still on the exclusive list, right?
So if the National Assembly is able to do that with the state assemblies, I think we'll see more development.
But there are other issues that are under the direct preserve of the states. For issues around, for instance, investment promotion. How well are states promoting things that they have comparative advantage in? This country is blessed. Every state in this federation is blessed with at least 3 solid minerals in commercial quantity. How well are we harnessing the potentials of the mineral sector? If you look at issues around land acquisition, for instance, how easy is it for businesses to buy land, get their CFOs and all of that? If you look at the taxation, how well are states doing on sort of putting together all of their exactly like multiple taxation and all of that? These are the things that would often impact your ability to attract investments, as the case may be. Infrastructure, road infrastructure, that's how how good is your road infrastructure. So all of these are things that states need to improve on to be able to attract investment. If you look at the NBS data for capital importation, which is an action of portfolio investments and foreign direct investments,
Lagos still dominates.
Between 2019 and 2021, about over 99% of what the 36 states put together had as capital importation was gotten by Lagos State. In fact, about 11 states of the Federation didn't get any capital importation between 2019 and 2021. So that tells you that in terms of looking at the states as investment destinations, a lot still needs to be done. Now, internally, if you look at the tax administration of the states as well, right? That needs to be digitized across board. And I always like to use Kaduna State as a model state for how states should efficiently and effectively collect tax. As at last year, 100% of the taxes were collected digitally. Nobody was doing any tax collection. They had weeded out a lot of the middlemen. As a matter of fact, the chairman of the Kaduna State Internal Revenue Service has a dashboard in his office that tells him by the hour how much each collection point, if it's a market, right, if it's a pack, is collecting at every hour during the day. So if there are targets given to that particular market, for instance, right, and if by 2 o'clock they are doing less than half of that target, he can call up the person who is supposed to mobilize taxes in that place to say, what's going on with my taxes? It's close to the end of business. We are not meeting up to half of the targets. And so you can track collection, without middlemen. And a lot of the leakages, from taxes happen through middlemen, right? It's not as if Nigerians are not paying taxes, but the taxes are going to non-state actors. When the states, right, that are supposed to are responsible for carrying out very critical investments on critical infrastructure are, in need of these revenues to be able to carry out very, very, very much needed expenditure. On the mobilization of revenues also, generally, on the Treasury single account, a lot of states are still yet to fully implement the Treasury single account.
In their states.
In the states. There are states that still run over 50 accounts. And so if you don't have a system that sort of sweeps your finances from all of these multiple accounts into a single account where you can view all of your state finances and sort of have a view of how you are doing well, how you are doing in terms of what you're able to put together as revenues, there's room for leakages. So the states need to first even cut the bleeding. One of our panelists, right, at the State of States launch yesterday said states can double their revenues by just plugging leakages, right? A lot of states lose more than half of their revenue due to leakages like this. The opportunities for corruption. If different MDAs are running different accounts, how do you as a central government know exactly what these MDAs are generating in terms of licenses, fines, fees, taxes, as the case may be, right? So these are very important reforms that states need to implement to be able to raise revenues. In terms of accountability, right? Because the SIFTA is coming to an end, states would need to institutionalize a lot of these reforms that have been incentivized. I know that a lot of states were propelled to carry out these reforms because of the added benefits. But beyond these benefits, states need to ensure that these reforms are institutionalized and that these good or laudable reforms have carried out around publishing of budget documents, around publishing of budget implementation reports, audited financial statements should remain. At the local government level, it needs to even be further strengthened, right? The budgeting process at the local government level needs to be strengthened.
Yes, Mr. Iniobong, I think we'll leave it at that because you've really highlighted the very key issues. The need for domestic resource mobilization, that alone is a big game changer if states adopt it. The need for effective fiscal policy, effective public finances, tax clear these multiple taxation issues, ease of doing business. There are a lot of developments that we're seeing that doesn't show that some states are taking ease of doing business seriously. And like you rightly said, we need again to institutionalize all these reforms, not just to get money or funds from World Bank, but institutionalize these reforms so that we can have states being very efficient. And I must thank you and your team at BudgIT for this report, because it's going to be what we'll use to talk a lot about and analyze states. And, you know, as we head up to the gubernatorial elections in 2023, every candidate from all the parties should go to that report and brace up for the times, because if you don't prepare, then definitely you're not ready to give leadership at Sub-National. So Sub-National must be the key focus, and must thank you once again, Mr. Iniobong, Usen, Head Policy and Research BudgIT, for this very interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and have a lovely day.
Yes, we look forward to more conversations around this, as you know that we are in a very decisive season in Nigeria. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And to all Nigerians, we're witnessing a worst flooding in a decade, as over 500 people have lost their lives this year due to the environmental disaster and 2022 floodings. States like Kogi, Anambra, Nasarawa, and Bayelsa are among the worst hit by the floods. This has posed significant concerns around issues of agribusiness and a likely increase in price of foodstuffs, especially as we brace up for the 2022 end-of-year celebrations, which kicks into the Christmas season. But of course, a report like this brings to the fore the need for states to reinvent themselves in policy and strategy, and also take seriously issues that have to do with the environment and advocacy and action on climate. And that will be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. You can follow our social media platforms to get updates on developments in the socio-economic space. Also, for our conversation today, if you have questions or comments, suggestions around this, you send them to the email displayed on the screen. Follow our website, www.project, to read our latest news stories, articles, reports, and watch our video. And for our guests today, of course, you can follow their social media at BudgIT NG to get all the latest around the State of States report, and of course, what we'll be publishing around that. Don't forget, to all our viewers, that this is a burning issue in the country, crude oil theft, and ProShare has published an incisive report around the anatomy of crude oil theft, understanding the implications, graft, and impacts. All you need to do is to go on our website to get further updates on how you can get this report, and it's displayed also on your screen. Thank you for being part of this show. Until we come your way again, have a lovely day.